Have you ever wondered what it feels like to stand in a crowd where every eye is against you and still choose to do what's right? In a small frontier town, one man carried that weight. Samuel Tallbear, the outsider they called a savage. When flames swallowed a neighbor's barn and a little girl's cries pierced through the smoke, every man hesitated, except him. Samuel ran into the fire, knowing he might not come back. What choice would you have made if it were your life against a child's? If it were you judged for who you are, not what you do? How would you respond? Would you meet hate with hate, or risk everything to prove love stronger than fear? Stay with us as we follow a story not only of survival, but of redemption, dignity, and the quiet power of choosing love. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the journey ahead. At the center stood Sheriff Callahan, badge flashing like a shard of noon. Beside him stood a shackled man, tall through the shoulders, sun-bronzed, the set of his spine unbent by iron. Dark hair brushed his collar. Rusted cuffs had chewed raw tracks into his wrists. Yet his chin was lifted, steady. "Step right up, folks." The sheriff called, voice full of courthouse authority and carnival patter. Said he was caught taking horses off Blackthorn Ranch. Judge says he is to be sold to settle damages. The crowd murmured its judgment. Someone hissed savage. Another spat beast. The man did not blink. His eyes moved slow across them all, calm in a way that made bluster wilt. 50 to start. Sheriff Callahan barked, "Who will give 50 for a strong back? Minds need bodies. Strings of half-broke broncs need hands." "I will buy him," she said, steady despite the tremor in her fingers. Silence settled so sudden even the wind held off. Now, Mrs. Graves," Sheriff Callahan said, mustache twitching with amusement. "This is not a church basket. This man is dangerous." "I will buy him," she repeated. She pulled a small cloth roll from her worn purse and set it in his palm. Coins knocked together softly. $70. All I have." The square broke into noise. "Eleanor, you have lost your senses," cried Mrs. Alden, the banker's wife. "You cannot bring that creature home. He is a thief." Someone shouted, "A savage." Eleanor's jaw set. "Call him what you want," she said, eyes fixed on the prisoner. "I see a man worth saving." That landed. Color rose under the sheriff's sunburn, but he could not argue it. He counted the coins slow, hoping for a shortfall. The number held. His scowl did too. "Bill of sale will be at my office. You can collect the paper and the man in an hour." He said, "I will take him now." Eleanor replied, "Now see here. I paid. By your own words, he is my property. As you put it, I will take him now, or you can tell Judge Beaumont you held him after the sale." The judge's name turned Callahan's protest thin. With sour reluctance, he fished out a key and dropped the ankle irons. The wrist cuffs stayed. "You will regret this." "Eleanor." "Mrs." Alden called. "Mark my words." Eleanor did not turn. "The only regret," she said loud enough for all, "would be standing by while you treat a human being like stock." Henry Pike, the grizzled blacksmith, shook his head. "That woman is courting death," he muttered. "You cannot civilize savages, not in their nature. But Nathan Carter, the doctor's boy, watch them go with a thoughtful tilt." "Maybe it is our nature that needs the civilizing," he said. His father cuffed his ear. "Mind your mouth, boy. Talk like that, we'll run you out of this town." Walking toward the sheriff's office, Eleanor felt the town's judgment settle over her shoulders like a yoke. She had carried heavier a husband lowered to red dirt, a ranch bleeding money, 3 years of pity camouflaged as kindness. She glanced at the man beside her. Even in chains, he moved with a quiet, contained strength. His face was weathered more by hard seasons than by age. They stepped into the squat adobe that held both jail cells and county ledgers. Sheriff Callahan had beaten them there and was scratching a bill of sale with more force than ink required. "You sure about this, Mrs. Graves?" he asked. "Not too late to let me find a different buyer. Someone better suited to handle him. Write the bill." "Sheriff?" she said. He stamped the paper hard and shoved it across. "There. May the Lord help you, since you will not help yourself." Eleanor folded the page, then held out her hand. "The keys." With a snort, he tossed her the key to the wrist cuffs. "Do not come crying when he cuts your throat in your sleep," he said. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "The last throat cut in this town was Tom Harlan in a whiskey fog, and he is white as flour. Good day. Sheriff." Outside. She stopped and faced the man. "I am going to unlock these now," she said, lifting the key. "I do not expect you to run. Where would you go? But I will not keep chains on you like an animal." Eleanor Graves, standing close enough to smell the dust of the trail still clinging to him, reached into her satchel. "We'll tend to those once we're home," she said, her tone steady though her heart raced. "I have salve. It's not far, an hour's ride at most. Can you handle a horse?" For an instant she thought he might not answer. Then his lips curved, just a whisper of a smile, and he nodded. Something in that tiny gesture lifted the weight pressing down on her chest. She pointed toward the livery stables. "This way." They walked together through the center of town. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Doors that had been open for the spectacle now hung half shut, their owners peeking out, eyes sharp with judgment. Eleanor felt the stares as surely as if they were stones thrown at her back. She'd stepped beyond her allotted role in Red Rock. She was no longer the pitied widow who lived alone on failing land. Now she was a woman who had bought a man the town called savage, dangerous in their eyes, reckless, maybe worse. They rode out of town in silence. The mare she borrowed plodded faithfully up the hill, while the stranger handled his mount with a calm surety that revealed a lifetime skill. By the time they reached the ridge, dusk was painting long shadows across the land. The ranch stretched below them, and as always, the sight twisted Eleanor's gut. The main house leaned eastward, its timbers gray as old bones. Fences sagged, some broken outright, the gaps wide enough to let cattle wander, but she hadn't had cattle to lose in months. The garden had surrendered to weeds. The barn stood only by habit, patch roof sagging under mismatched shingles. Once this land had been her pride. Now it looked like the remains of a dream abandoned. She braced herself for the look of scorn she expected from the man beside her. But when she risked a glance, he only nodded, as though he had seen worse, as though ruin was nothing new to him. Still, the words tumbled out of her unbidden. It wasn't always like this. She regretted them the moment they left her mouth. Why should she care what he thought? But he gave no reply, only dismounted in silence and began tending to the borrowed horse with an easy competence that reminded her how long it had been since another pair of hands had helped her with chores. "You can sleep in the barn," she said, not quite meeting the stranger's gaze. "Fresh hay in the loft, blankets in the chest by the door. I'll bring supper out when it's ready." She busied herself with the stove, beans and cornbread, the last jar of peaches from better seasons. When she finally turned, he was staring at the photograph on the mantel. "My husband," Eleanor said softly. "Jacob. Fever took him 3 winters back." The man nodded once, solemn, then started toward the door. Before leaving, he hesitated, his lips working as though dragging up a word long buried. "Thank you," he said at last, voice rough, gravelly with disuse. Then he disappeared into the night, leaving Eleanor with her hand pressed to her chest, where her heart drummed like it wanted to break free. They ate in silence, broken only by the rustle of barn cats drawn by the smell. A striped tabby brushed against his leg. Eleanor watched, surprised, as his hand dropped to stroke the animal gently, almost tenderly. Something in her chest eased. That night Eleanor lay awake in the creaking old house. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone on the ranch. The thought should have unsettled her. Everyone in town expected she would be terrified, but instead she felt something she could not quite name. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of it. Morning brought with it the endless tally of repairs and debts. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper. 3 leaks in the roof. The well pump needed leather washers. Foxes slipping through a hole in the chicken coop. Rabbits chewing through the garden fence. And over all of it, the weight of money she didn't have. The list blurred before her eyes until a soft knock sounded at the door. The man stood on her porch. Same tattered clothes, his hair tied back with a strip of leather. He gestured toward the barn, then to himself, then mimed the swing of a hammer. Eleanor blinked. "You want to work?" He nodded once. "I can't pay you," she told him quickly. "I spent everything I had. Food and shelter. That's all I can promise." She led him to the tool shed. Jacob's tools hanging untouched for 3 years, their edges dulled by rust. He inspected each with a craftsman's eye, setting aside the broken, testing the weight of the rest. When he found Jacob's whetstone, he glanced at her as if asking permission. "Yes," she whispered. "Use whatever you need." The words caught in her throat. By midday, the sound of hammer against wood carried across the yard. Eleanor busied herself with the chickens and garden, though her gaze drifted constantly back to him. Already one section of sagging fence stood straight. His movements were precise, deliberate, efficient. When she brought him a pail of water, he drank deep, then surprised her by speaking again. "Good tools," he said, voice still rough. He gestured toward the shed. "Your man. New iron." The stranger considered that, then nodded slowly. "Wise." That evening she insisted he join her at the kitchen table. The meal was simple beans again, cornbread, and wild greens from the garden, but the company was different. As they ate, she found herself talking. About Jacob, about the land, about her family back east who had written her letters urging her to come home after Jacob's death. Letters she had ignored. They had stopped writing altogether when she refused. "They couldn't understand why I stayed," she admitted, pushing beans around her plate. "But this is where Jacob and I built our life. Leaving would have been like burying him twice." The man listened without interruption, his dark eyes steady on her. He said nothing, yet his silence was not empty. It carried weight, as if he understood in ways words could never touch. For the first time since Jacob's death, Eleanor felt heard. As night folded over the ranch, Eleanor banked the fire and stood in the doorway watching him cross the yard back to the barn. The moon lit his figure against the shadows. She realized then that for all the judgment Red Rock might heap upon her, for all the gossip and the risk, she had made the only choice her heart would let her. For the first time in 3 long years, the house did not feel empty. Eleanor pushed her beans around the plate, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of her face. She hadn't meant to talk so much, yet the words had spilled out. "This was our dream," she said, her voice quiet but edged with bitterness. "Jacob's and mine. We thought we'd raise horses, maybe cattle, build something worth handing down. Instead, I've watched it slip through my fingers piece by piece. The bank owns more of it than I do." Her laugh was dry and humorless. "Land remembers," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Bad years, good years, but land waits, for hands that stay, for hearts that know." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. It was the longest sentence he'd spoken since she'd freed him, and it carried the kind of wisdom that came from surviving more than most. She sat without speaking until the words settled deep. Days folded into a week, then two. A rhythm took hold on the ranch. He rose with the sun, shoulders bent to the work of mending, hammering, setting fence posts straight. She managed the kitchen, the garden, the small tasks that had once felt like survival, but now began to feel like steps towards something more. In the evenings they shared meals, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a few careful words that always seemed chosen with care. "Samuel," she repeated softly. His smile widened at hearing his name spoken without malice. The town of Red Rock, of course, had not stopped watching. At Carter's Mercantile, where Eleanor bought flour and coffee, conversations died the moment she entered. Women she had known for years now crossed the street to avoid her, their whispers sharp as barbed wire. Only Nathan Carter, the doctor's son, treated her kindly. He always slipped an extra apple or two into her purchases when his father wasn't watching. "They're saying things," Nathan warned her one afternoon, his voice low, eyes darting around. "Ugly things about you and him. Just be careful," the boy urged. "Some of the men are talking about riding out to your place. They say it's to make sure you're safe." His tone carried the weight of what he didn't say aloud. Cold washed through her veins, but she kept her voice even. "You tell those men that I'm safer now than I've been in 3 years. And if any of them set foot on my land without invitation, they'll be staring down Jacob's shotgun." That night she did indeed pull the shotgun from its place above the mantel. Her hands trembled only slightly as she cleaned and loaded it. The next morning, Samuel noticed the weapon leaning by the door. He gave a grim nod. No words needed. He understood. He began working closer to the house that day, a hammer hanging from his belt even when he wasn't using it. The first test came sooner than either of them expected. Eleanor was bent over the garden rows when she heard the pounding of hooves. She counted 4 horses. The sound stopped at her gate. She forced her grip to loosen on the hoe, straightened, and kept her eyes on the soil. She turned slowly. Charles Mercer sat astride his bay, a wealthy rancher with eyes like cold steel. Beside him were the Harlan brothers, 2 notorious drunks who never missed a chance to sneer at anyone weaker, and, hanging back, Sheriff Callahan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "As you can see, Mr. Mercer, I'm perfectly well," Eleanor said, keeping her voice calm though her pulse raced. Mercer dismounted, his polished boots sinking into her dusty yard. His hand rested near the pistol on his hip. "You can't fault folks for worrying. A woman alone, living with a savage." Mercer's mouth twisted. "You've lost your senses, but I'm prepared to help. I'll take that creature off your hands and offer a fair price for this land. You could leave, go back east, start fresh. My land is not for sale." "Everything's for sale," Mercer said smoothly. "It's only a matter of price." Mercer took a step closer, and Samuel appeared. One moment he was gone. The next he stood at Eleanor's side, tall and silent, the hammer in his hand glinting in the sunlight. His presence was enough to tilt the balance. The Harlan brothers tensed, hands drifting toward their revolvers. But Sheriff Callahan barked, "Hold it!" The sheriff looked from Eleanor to Samuel, something shifting in his expression. "The ladies asked you to leave. Mercer, best we do just that." Mercer's face flushed with anger. "You're siding with her?" "With him." For a moment Eleanor thought Mercer might defy him. But finally, with a glare that could have curdled milk, he swung back into the saddle. "This isn't finished," he said. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, don't expect help from decent folks." The riders wheeled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung long after they were gone. Eleanor's knees weakened, and she might have fallen if Samuel hadn't steadied her arm with a firm but gentle grip. "Thank you," she whispered. That night Eleanor couldn't bring herself to send him back to the barn. "There's a room off the kitchen," she said hesitantly. "It was meant for... well, it's empty. You'd be closer if..." Her words faltered. Samuel seemed to understand. He inclined his head and said nothing. That night, for the first time since Jacob's death, Eleanor slept knowing someone else was under her roof, someone who would stand between her and the darkness that threatened. And in his small room, Samuel lay awake, listening to the night sounds of this strange place that no longer felt entirely foreign. He thought of the woman who had looked at him and seen a man, not a beast. He made a silent vow that her faith would not be wasted. "We'll stop at the creek," she said, pointing toward the cottonwoods. He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. At the water's edge. Samuel dismounted carefully. Instead of reaching for the tin cup tied to his saddle, he knelt and cupped the clear water in both hands, drinking as if it were a sacrament. Watching him, Eleanor felt her breath catch. The act carried reverence, as though he was greeting the land itself. When their eyes met, heat rose in her cheeks. She said the first words that came to her. "The water's good here, fed by the snowmelt." He nodded and, after a pause, spoke. "Water knows. Clean heart, clean water. You speak English well," she said softly, settling herself on a fallen log. A shadow crossed his face, but he said nothing. Eleanor realized then how much more there was to learn and how much danger might still follow them both. They rested by the cottonwoods where the creek ran clear over rounded stones. Samuel crouched and drank from his cupped hands as if the water itself deserved respect. When he straightened, Eleanor saw a trace of tiredness pull at his mouth. "What should I call you?" she asked. "I do not know your name." He considered for a long moment, the wind lifting strands of his hair. Then he touched his chest. "They gave me Samuel there, but my people call me Tallbear." Samuel Tallbear. Eleanor tried the name as if it were a promise. Samuel Tallbear. It felt right and solid on her tongue. He studied her with that level gaze. "Should I be?" she asked. "Others fear," he said, glancing toward the ridgeline that hid Red Rock from view. "They see a savage. You see a man." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I see a man. You are hurt," she said. "Let me see." For a breath he hesitated, then pulled his torn shirt aside. Bruises bloomed along his ribs in cruel colors. Older scars crossed his back like old roads on a map made of skin. Eleanor bit back a gasp. "Who did this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Red Rock was not gentle with men in chains. "It matters to me," Eleanor answered, fierce before she knew the words were there. He looked at her with something close to astonishment. "Strange woman," he murmured. "Buys a man like stock, then worries for his pain." "I did not buy a man," she said. "I bought your freedom." There is a difference. By the time they topped the last rise, the ranch lay open before them in the good gold of late afternoon. Every shortcoming showed in that honest light. The fence lines drooped. The barn roof was a patchwork of whatever she could scrounge. Weeds had taken more ground than her vegetables. Eleanor heard herself say it is not much. It needs more than one person can manage. She regretted the defensiveness as soon as she heard it. Samuel studied the place like a man reading terrain before a storm. Then he gave a single, decisive nod. "Good bones," he said. "The land wants to live. It needs care." "Care," she echoed, feeling the word settle. They rode down in easy quiet until he pulled his horse up short near the front gate that barely deserved the name. His hand went to his side, where a weapon might have hung. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "Visitors," she said, already knowing who. They rounded the barn and found 3 horses tied to her porch rail, as if her place were theirs. Men lounged on her steps like they owned them. Charles Mercer, clean hat and cold eyes. 2 of his hands, hard men who had done his rough work before. "Afternoon, Eleanor," Mercer said with a pleasant tone that fooled no one. "Been a long time since you came down out of that hill. We got to worrying." "Not long enough," she said under her breath. Aloud she asked, "What brings you here?" "Mr. Mercer, my senses are fine." "Thank you for the concern." "Is that so?" Mercer stepped off the porch, one hand easy near his belt. "Only a woman who has lost her wits brings a savage into her house." "His name is Samuel," Eleanor said, cool and sharp. "He is here to help with the ranch. Unless you are volunteering to mend fences and fix roofs, I suggest you mind your own business. My land is not for sale." "Everything sells," he said. "All it takes is a number. Get off my porch." Eleanor answered, quiet now, and dangerous. The sheriff looked from Eleanor to Samuel and back to Mercer. "The lady told you to leave." "Mercer, that is her right. The law backs her. You are taking her side." Mercer snapped. "I am taking the law's side," Callahan said. "Mount up." Eleanor's legs felt unsteady. Samuel steadied her elbow with a touch that was careful of both pride and fear. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "You stood for me," he said. "I stand for you." She managed a rough nod. The words lodged deep. Samuel understood without her finishing the thought. He inclined his head once, later, as Eleanor lay in her narrow bed. She listened to the house breathe differently, the old boards creaking under more than one set of footsteps. It had been years since another person slept under her roof. The awareness should have unsettled her. Instead, it steadied her like a hand at her back. In his plain room, Samuel stretched out on the narrow cot and stared at the dark. He listened to the rustle of night wind in the eaves and the distant shifting of horses in their stalls. He thought of iron-biting skin and of a woman standing in a dust-choked square and telling a town to look again. He made himself a quiet promise that her faith would not be wasted. Dawn came clear and cool. They shared coffee on the back step, while the eastern sky went from ash to rose. Eleanor spread a scrap of paper on her knee. She sketched a list: leaks in the roof, washers for the pump, a chicken coop that let foxes saunter through, rabbits in the garden, and under it all the debt she could not ignore. Samuel set his cup aside and touched the page. They worked side by side through the morning. He set posts straight, tamping the earth firm around them. She held rails and carried nails and fetched water. By midday, the line nearest the house stood sound for the first time in months. When she brought him a tin cup, he drank and then spoke. Slow and careful as always. Your man cared for tools. He said, good iron, good hands. Jacob believed a person was only as capable as what they worked with, she said. He kept his tools sharp and his horses well shod. Wise, Samuel said, and went back to work. The next afternoon, the pump gave a stubborn groan and then a clear rush. Cold water splashed bright into the trough. Samuel grinned unguarded, and the change that simple joy worked in his face startled Eleanor. He wiped his hands and looked at her as if he was offering something that mattered. Samuel, he said, touching his chest again. Samuel Tallbear. Eleanor met the moment with respect. I am Eleanor, she said. You know that, but it feels right to say it again. Eleanor Graves. They shook hands, not as owner and hired help, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people starting the hard work of rebuilding something that might last. They ate in the kitchen that evening, while the late light washed the table pale. Eleanor told him about letters from her sister in Chicago, full of instructions to pack up and come home where grief would be cleaner and life would be safer. The letters had slowed and then stopped when Eleanor did not answer. Samuel listened without interruption, his attention steady. After a while, he stood and looked out at the deepening blue of the land. The words lingered after they cleared the dishes. Eleanor stepped onto the porch and breathed in the scent of damp dirt and cut wood and evening. Somewhere a coyote called. The horses shifted and settled. The ranch did not feel abandoned. It felt like a place that might be claimed again. Later, a soft clop sounded down the road. Eleanor set her coffee aside, and Samuel moved to the porch rail, quiet but watchful. Only one rider, Sheriff Callahan. He tipped his hat and stayed in the saddle. Mercer's stirring, folks, he said without preamble. I told him the law protects your right to hire who you please and to live as you please, but he will test it if he thinks it profits him. Keep that shotgun close. Keep your doors barred at night. The sheriff glanced at Samuel. The two men regarded one another a heartbeat longer than comfort required. Callahan nodded, as if some private measure had been taken and found acceptable, then turned his horse and rode back toward town. When the quiet returned, Samuel looked at Eleanor. Why did you do it? He asked. Buy freedom for a stranger. Eleanor gripped the porch railing and looked out at the dark line of the oaks. When I saw you in irons, sold like an animal, I thought about those 3 days when Jacob burned with fever, and there was nothing I could do. I could not save him, but I could save you. It is selfish, maybe, or foolish. She blew out a slow breath. Come inside. I will show you the room off the kitchen. Tomorrow we begin again. He nodded once. In his eyes she saw the smallest ember of something she had not seen there before. Hope. Cautious, but real. That night Eleanor fell asleep to the sound of another person moving quietly in her house. She woke before dawn feeling less alone than she had since Jacob's last winter. In his narrow room, Samuel lay on his back, eyes open to the dark, listening to the place settle around him. He set his hand on the floorboard as if greeting the house itself, and with that thought the long night finally gave way to light. Night settled softly over the ranch. The wind slipped through the cottonwoods, and the old house gave its familiar creak as the boards cooled. Eleanor sat across from Samuel at the kitchen table and watched him eat. He took his time with every bite, deliberate, as if food should be honored rather than merely consumed. When he looked up, their eyes met. He tipped his chin a fraction, and the simple acknowledgment sent warmth through her, more sure than any spoken thanks. "Tomorrow we should ride to town for supplies," Eleanor said. "I need nails, a small bundle of shingles if I can afford them, maybe a length of rope." She stopped herself then, the memory of her thinning purse emptying the hope from her voice. "Before jail," he said, "hidden. They did not find it. I cannot take your money." He nudged the pouch back toward her with 2 fingers. "For the ranch, for us." The last word settled inside her like a coal-catching fire. Us. She closed the pouch and covered it with her palm. "All right," she said softly. "We will spend it wisely." She rose with the gray light and brewed 2 tin cups of coffee. As she stepped into the yard, she found Samuel already working behind the barn. The splitting maul rose and fell in a smooth rhythm, each stroke clean, the rounds cracking open to reveal tidy wedges of firewood. His shirt hung on a post, and the fading bruises along his ribs showed like old thunderheads breaking apart. "You are up early," she said, passing him a cup. He wiped his brow with his forearm and took it with a nod. They stood a while without speaking, watching the sky trade silver for gold along the far mountains. "Today we fix fence," he said, motioning toward the pasture where several posts leaned like drunks at closing time. Samuel considered her with a thoughtful calm that did not make her feel looked down upon. "You know other work," he said. "Garden, chickens, house." He shifted his hand to take in the whole place. "Takes 2 kinds of strength." It was more than he usually said in a single stretch. Eleanor swallowed hard against the sting behind her eyes and nodded. They fell into a natural rhythm as the sun climbed. Samuel dug the post holes with steady strokes, his weight and patience doing the labor of 2 men. Eleanor kept the fresh cedar posts braced while he tamped the earth firm around the base. He checked each line with his eye, and a piece of baling twine stretched tight between notches. They learned each other's habits quickly. She was there with a rail when he turned, with a nail when he reached, with the water pail when his breath grew slow and deep. "My father would have liked this land," Samuel said unexpectedly. "He said country with sage and cedar carries a strong spirit." "Is he alive?" she asked carefully. Samuel's face went still. "Gone many winters. Soldiers came to our village, said we must move. My father would not leave the graves of our people." His voice held no drama. The plainness of it landed harder than any shout. "You have a soft heart," he said quietly. "Dangerous in a hard world." "Perhaps," she answered, "but I would rather have a soft heart than a hard one." He accepted that without argument. They returned to work. By late afternoon, a long run of fence stood true. The sight of something made right after so much decline sent a small surge of pride through Eleanor. She had nearly forgotten what progress felt like. "Mrs. Graves," Nathan called, pulling up by the porch. "I have something for you." He dismounted and glanced at Samuel, then offered a polite nod. Eleanor marked the courtesy. In Red Rock, such small gestures mattered. "What is it, Nathan?" she asked. He drew a letter from his jacket pocket. "This came on the stage yesterday. My pa told me to bring it out to you." He hesitated, voice dropping. "There is talk in town. Mr. Mercer has been stirring folks up, saying things that are not true. Some of the men are getting themselves worked up about it." Eleanor studied the letter. "Chicago," the corner said, in a familiar hand. "Margaret." The paper shook a little as she broke the seal. She read in silence. the words like small cuts. Dearest Eleanor, word has reached us of your recent actions. We are shocked to hear you have brought a savage into your home. Mother is beside herself. Please stop this madness. Sell the ranch, and come back where you belong. You cannot play at being a man, and now keep company with heathens. Think of Jacob's memory. If nothing else, consider what he would say. With love, Margaret. The last line made her jaw tighten. She crushed the letter in her fist and stood very still. Samuel watched her without pressing. My sister, Eleanor said at last. Bitter as tonic. News rides faster than good sense. She believes I should sell out and go back to Chicago. A proper widow in black who pours tea for polite women and nods when spoken to. No, she said, the word coming out fierce enough to startle a sparrow from the fence. This is my home. Jacob and I built this life together, and I will not abandon it because it is hard, or because I am alone, or because people disapprove of my choices. Not alone now, Samuel said, quiet as a promise. She looked at him standing there with dirt on his hands from work they had done together, and sweat along his brow from labor on her land. Something shifted inside her, an easing she had not let herself feel in years. No, she said softly. Not alone. Samuel listened, sometimes asking a quiet question that showed he held every detail. When she turned the conversation to him, he spoke in the same careful cadence. He told her of tracking with his grandfather and of songs at dusk and ceremonies that honored the turning seasons. He spoke of a world that had seemed to shrink year by year as more wagons cut ruts across the plains. Your English is strong, Eleanor said gently. You told me about mission school. His face tightened. 3 years, he said. They cut our hair, took our language, beat us for speaking it. They said, kill the Indian, save the man. He touched his chest. They could not kill what lives here. The days found a steady shape after that. They drank coffee on the back steps while the sky found its color. They worked until heat shimmered above the dirt. Samuel shouldered the heavy jobs, while Eleanor kept the garden from surrendering entirely and coaxed the hens back to laying. They ate together when the sun went down, and gradually the house began to sound like a place where 2 people lived. Floorboards complained differently. The old stove held heat longer. Even the night songs outside felt changed, as if the coyotes had shifted their path to account for the new pattern. In the morning, Eleanor took the coin pouch to the table and counted out what they could risk. Nails, leather washers, a few shingles, maybe lamp oil, a little flour and salt pork if Carter's Mercantile would extend credit on the strength of hard eyes, and cash on the barrel. She looked at Samuel. We will be careful in town, she said. He nodded. I will walk beside you, not behind. Inside Carter's Mercantile. Nathan stacked feed sacks while his father measured calico for a miner's wife. The store smelled of coffee, oiled leather, and sun-warmed wood. Nathan's face lit when he saw Eleanor. He tipped his chin to Samuel, and Samuel returned the courtesy. It was a small exchange, but it loosened something tight in Eleanor's back. What can I do for you, Mrs. Graves, Doctor? Carter asked without warmth. He took in Samuel with a brief pinched glance, and then looked away. Eleanor set her list on the counter. Nails, washers, a small tin of salve if you have it, lamp oil, and 2 lengths of rope. If you can spare 6 shingles, I will take them. She laid the silver on the wood. Cash for half, and perhaps you will carry the rest a week. The doctor looked as if a sour taste had risen in his mouth, but the rattle of coin softened him. He rang the bell for Nathan, who began piling supplies with quick competence. when Nathan reached for the shingles. Dr. Carter made a motion to stop him. Nathan did not see or pretended not to. The bundles thumped on the counter. They made the haul back up the ridge in 2 trips, the mare leaning into the harness with a patience Eleanor admired. By the time the sun lowered, the shingles were stacked by the house, and the rope hung on its peg. Samuel set to the well pump again with the new washers and a look of satisfaction a man wears only when a plan finally meets the right tool. That evening, after they had eaten, Eleanor took out Margaret's letter once more. The paper had softened where her hand had crushed it. She smoothed it flat on the table and read it again, this time without letting it cut. She heard her sister's fear in the pretty words, heard the same voice that had told Eleanor as a girl not to run too fast, not to climb too high, not to risk a fall. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and slid it into a drawer beside Jacob's old tax receipts. Samuel watched her do it. "You will not go," he said. He nodded once, as if that settled a thing within him. "You and me," he said. "We will set posts. We will make the roof hold. We will keep water sweet." He tapped the table where the list had been. Little things. Every day. Eleanor smiled, a real one that lived in her cheeks as well as her mouth. Little things. Every day. She liked the sound of that. It felt like the spine of a life. When she banked the fire and stepped out onto the porch, the night air smelled faintly of cut cedar and clean pump water. Down in the pasture, the repaired fence line ran straight across the dark, like a sentence spoken plain. Somewhere in the barn, a cat knocked over something light and hollow. Samuel stood at the edge of the porch, looking toward the road, listening to whatever the dark might bring. He did not seem troubled. He seemed ready. She looked at the man who had altered the feel of her home in a handful of days. "Thank you," she said. He turned his head a little, just enough to meet her eyes. "We start again tomorrow," he said. "Yes," she answered. "Tomorrow." Evening settled into a quiet that felt earned. Some nights they traded a few stories. Other nights they simply sat on the porch and let the hush do the talking, while crickets worked the dark edges of the yard. Changes showed everywhere once you knew how to look. Fence lines stood straight where they had slumped. The barn door no longer sagged like a tired shoulder. The garden, cleared and watered on a schedule, pushed up greens that promised meals instead of apologies. Even the hens had found their rhythm again, dropping warm eggs into straw nests as if they had been waiting for an invitation back to usefulness. Samuel stood in the barn doorway, surprised to find her looking. "That was beautiful," she said. "What is it?" "Song for Horses," he answered, eyes dropping for a breath as if he had been caught at something private. "My grandfather's song. It makes them calm. Would you teach me?" "Yes." They began with simple things. He touched the creek with his palm and gave her the word for water. He tilted his face to the wide sky and gave her the word for sky. He pressed his hand to the ground and said the word for earth. He corrected her gently when her mouth rounded the wrong way. Humor in his eyes, but never mockery. She found the sounds landed in different places in her throat than English did. She liked the way the syllables made her slow down and pay attention. In return, she brought out an old primer and a Bible with print that had faded to gray. He could speak English cleanly when he chose, but reading had been taken from him by people who pretended it was a gift. She traced letters with a patient finger and let him go at his own pace. When he puzzled a sentence and made sense of it, a grin would crease his face, sudden and boyish, and she felt the house grow lighter by a handful of years. "Thank you," she said, surprising herself, "for staying, for working." For all of this, I could not have managed it alone. You gave me freedom, Samuel said. I give you my hands and my strength. That is fair trade. Is that all it is? A trade. Tears pricked before she could harden against them. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. His palm was rough with work, warm with life. His fingers closed around hers gently, as if he understood how something fragile and strong could be the same thing. They sat like that until stars showed up one by one. The world beyond their fence would disapprove, threaten, probably worse. But on that porch, in that hour, they had built something the world could not name and so could not easily steal. It had the shape of partnership. It carried the weight of trust. It felt like the beginning of a thing that grows. When Eleanor finally went inside, she stopped at her bedroom window and looked back toward the barn. A soft glow leaked through the old boards. Samuel's lantern burned as he settled the horses for the night. Tomorrow would bring work. Tomorrow might bring more talk, and the trouble that follows, talk. But tonight she owned a small pocket of hope. For the first time since Jacob died, the ranch felt like home that could be lived in, not a shrine to sorrow. Before dawn, a sound pulled Eleanor out of uneasy sleep. Hoofbeats. Several. She slipped from bed and went to the window. Torchlight bobbed along the road like fireflies that had learned to hate. 5 or 6 riders, maybe more. She dressed fast, hands steady from practice, not from calm. Jacob's shotgun stood by the door where it had stood every night since Samuel came. She reached for it and heard a movement in the small room off the kitchen. Samuel stepped out fully dressed, face set. "Stay inside," Eleanor said. "This is my fight." "No," he said, and the single syllable did not invite argument. "We stand together, Mrs. Graves," the Reverend called, that righteous roll in his voice that had always rubbed her wrong. "We have come to talk sense to you." Eleanor stepped onto the porch. The shotgun hung easy in her hands, pointed at no one. Ready all the same. Samuel stood just behind her left shoulder, a calm shadow. Strange hour for a social call. "Reverend," Eleanor said, "desperate times call for desperate measures." Whitcomb answered as he swung down from his saddle. He looked like a crow in a field that had been cut too close. "This situation has gone on long enough. You are living in sin with a heathen. You bring shame on yourself and danger to this community." Jim Harlan spat brown juice into her yard. "Do not matter where he sleeps. Ain't natural. A white woman taking up with a savage." "Mind your mouth on my property," Eleanor warned. "Or what?" Pete Harlan sneered. "You going to have your tame Indian scalp us?" "See?" Reverend Whitcomb cried. "Seizing his moment, he threatens good Christian men. This is what happens when God's order is mocked." "The only threat here," Eleanor said, her voice cutting the cold air fine, "is from men who ride to a woman's house in the dark with torches in their hands, like a lynch mob." "Now hold on," Hutchins began. "You have lost your way," Whitcomb said. "Sermon rhythm in full swing now. First, you refused to return to your family after your husband's death, choosing to live alone like a man. Now this abomination, it is not too late. Send this creature away. Come back to town. The women of the church will set you right. Guide me." Eleanor laughed, and it came out sharp enough to make a horse dance sideways. "The same women who cross the street rather than meet my eyes. The ones who whisper when I buy flour. No thank you. Reverend, I will take my chances with the company I keep. Then you make your choice." Hutchins growled. "Do not expect help when it goes bad. And it will. These people cannot be trusted. One morning you will wake up with your throat. "This is not over," Jim Harlan warned. "Mercer has plans for this place, and he will not let some Indian lover stand in his way." "Mercer can go to hell," Eleanor said evenly. "So can the rest of you if you cannot see a man's worth beyond the color of his skin." Something ugly moved across Whitcomb's face. He swung back into his saddle with a flap of black coat. He gathered the reins with a showman's snap and turned his mount. Hutchins glared. The Harlan brothers let their hands brush their holsters in that childish way some men do when they want to feel large. No one drew iron. In pairs and singles, they rode off, torches tossing sparks that died quickly on damp ground. "You spoke true," he said at last. "It may not matter," she answered. "It matters," he said. Words like that lay a line on the ground. Men choose which side they stand. "Thank you for standing with me," she said. "We said we stand together." He answered, "We keep our word." They went inside and shared coffee that tasted like something saved from a fire. Neither said much. They did not need to. After the cups were empty, they checked the gates and the barn for damage and found only boot prints and the bruised places torch carriers always leave behind. Work filled the day. The best kind of work. The kind that keeps your mind from returning again and again to what might come in the night. Eleanor spoke her new words under her breath as she moved through the garden. Water, sky, earth. She shaped them until her mouth remembered the root. "They will be back," he said, "or others like them." "Yes," Eleanor said, "but they will not find us bowing our heads." He looked at her and smiled a little. "I know this about you." Eleanor broke the quiet at last. "Will you sing the horse song again?" Samuel's answer was a nod. The melody rose in the soft dark, old as the people who had given it to him. The notes poured into the yard and up into the cottonwood, where they settled among leaves that had listened to many things and would listen to many more. The horses shifted in their stalls and calmed. Eleanor felt something inside her that had been braced for years finally loosen another notch. When the song ended, he looked over at her. She was smiling without meaning to. He smiled back, and in that exchange, there was more courage than in any torch carried by men who think fear is a kind of holiness. They sat until the kettle called them back to the kitchen. The house felt different, even from the morning, as if speaking the truth that the gate had cleared some old air that had been lingering too long. Eleanor poured tea and set the cups on the table Jacob had built when his hands were young and eager. She ran her palm across the wood and felt the grain like a map of where she had been and where she might yet go. "We begin again tomorrow," she said. Samuel lifted his cup. "Tomorrow." He agreed. When the hoofbeats faded, Eleanor felt the tremor start in her forearms and run to her hands. The shotgun that had been steady as a fence post now weighed more than an anvil. She leaned it against the post and breathed until the shaking eased. Samuel told her she had spoken well. "Strong words, true words," he said in that even voice of his. She answered that words felt small when men rode by torchlight and promised trouble. He said they would not come again tonight. On that single point, she chose to believe him. They stood together as the dark thinned and the sky picked up pink along the rim of the hills. Morning looked fragile, like something that could crack if touched too roughly. Eleanor said she was sorry that he had to bear the ugliness meant for her, as well as the hatred meant for him. "Life is not about fair," Samuel said. "Was it fair when you bought my freedom? Was it fair when you set yourself between me and the men with guns? You did what was right. This is more than fair." Tears pressed at the corners of her eyes. She said they might hurt him or worse, because of choices she had made. He said she saw a man where others saw less, and that he chose this place and this fight. He said he stayed not for work or shelter alone, but for a woman who had stood with a shotgun against 6 riders and spoke truth into the teeth of lies and gave back dignity to someone who had none. The words struck deeper than any sermon. Eleanor let the tears come and did not apologize for them. Samuel did not reach for her. He stood in a way that felt like a wall at her back, the kind that does not move when the weather turns. The fences proved untouched. Even so, Samuel stayed nearer the house that day than usual, his eyes skimming the horizon whenever the wind changed. By evening, Eleanor brought out a bundle wrapped in old oilcloth. She set it on the table and unrolled it. A Colt revolver lay inside, oiled and ready though it had slept for 3 years. "Jacob's," she said. "I want you to have it." He looked from the weapon to her. "You trust me with this?" he asked. "Not in wounded pride, but as a plain measure of truth." "I trust you with my life," Eleanor said. "You have already proved that worthy." Samuel checked the cylinder and the hammer with a practiced hand and said he would not dishonor the gift. She said she knew. Wagon wheels rattled on the road, and Eleanor's hand found the shotgun again. But Samuel looked through the curtain and said, "One wagon, an old man driving, a woman beside him." Eleanor felt her shoulders loosen. Lars and Ingrid Olsen pulled up by the porch with the easy skill of people who had worn out teams and roads. They climbed down and said they had heard there was trouble. "News moves fast in Red Rock," Eleanor answered, bone-tired. Ingrid said a man of God does not ride with torches, and called the Reverend a crow in a coat, without using the word itself. Lars said they had brought flour and salt and a side of pork and jars of preserves Ingrid had put up, and then he pulled a rifle from the wagon bed and said, "Spare. You might need it." Eleanor stammered that she could not pay, and Ingrid cut her off with a look that would have halted a stampede. "Not for paying," Ingrid said. She turned to Samuel and asked if he was the one helping Mrs. Graves. Samuel bowed his head and answered that he was. "Good," Ingrid said. "She tries to do too much alone." She told a quick story about how Lars had nearly broken himself the first year in the valley, because pride will do that to a man who loves his land too much to ask another soul for help. She pressed a small bundle into Eleanor's hands, seed saved from her own garden. "Plant in spring," she said. "You will have good vegetables." After the wagon rolled away, the two of them carried supplies inside and stacked the gifts with careful hands. Samuel said good people still lived in the valley. Eleanor said she had forgotten there were any left and then corrected herself. She had almost forgotten, but not quite. Sleep did not come easy. Eleanor watched the barn light until it went dark, then stood at the window and listened to the small sounds of the ranch. The day had drawn a line between before and after. They were not employer and hired man any longer. They were partners, whether the town liked the word or not. The thought steadied her, then filled her with heat that was not fear. Days followed with a steadier pulse. They worked shoulder to shoulder, took meals on the porch when the heat let them, and said little that did not need saying. What needed saying came without struggle. Eleanor kept her voice around the new words he was teaching her. Water, sky, earth. She learned the names for wind from the east and wind from the west, for horse with a good mind and horse with a stubborn head. Samuel puzzled through sentences in the primer and took quiet pleasure in tracing the path of a paragraph without stumbling. Evenings moved in a way that made time feel full instead of heavy. Work made different kind of news on the ranch. The barn door slid on a straight rail. The kitchen lintel sat true. The repaired fence held the line against cattle that no longer belonged to Eleanor, but still wandered past out of old habit. Hens began to lay again with unhurried confidence. The garden came back in neat rows. The well gave cold water without complaint. All this change was built from small choices repeated until they became the shape of a day. One warm evening, Eleanor set supper under the cottonwood. The stew tasted better because the carrots and onions had come out of soil they had turned together. The sky burned orange, then purple, then settled into a deep blue that grew stars. Eleanor asked Samuel to tell her about his family if he wanted to, and said he did not have to. He said it was a good thing to speak their names so they stayed alive inside him. He told her of his father called Strong Elk, not a war chief the way white men argue about such things. He said, "A man who made sure the children ate and the elders kept warm, and who stood hard when standing hard was the work required, and who laughed gently with his family when the day allowed it." He told her of his mother named Singing River, who knew plants for healing and could pull tears from a proud warrior with a song so clean it laid grief bare and then eased it. As he spoke, the lines that hardship had left on his face softened into something younger. His words did not ask for pity. They asked for nothing. They offered a picture of a life balanced on responsibilities and love. Eleanor listened and kept her hands still in her lap so she would not reach across the table and break the spell of his voice. When he paused, she said that Jacob had been a man of gentle hands, with horses and clumsy feet when it came to the chicken yard. She said he had dreamed big and worked hard and died fast. She said the two of them had built a dream on this patch of earth and that she had watched it come apart board by board until Samuel walked into the yard and put his shoulder under it with her. They cleaned the bowls and sat on the steps. A lantern glowed soft behind the kitchen window. The wind came up for a moment and then rested. Samuel spoke again, answering questions she had not voiced. He told her of ceremonies by firelight, of boys led into the hills to learn patience from stone and thirst and the way stars keep their places. He spoke of the old paths that had narrowed as more wagons cut their own, of treaties that broke faster than spring ice, of steady departures until only a few families held to the edges of old ground. His voice held no plea and no apology. It held fact and memory and a thread of pride that would not be trimmed to fit another man's measure. Eleanor said that her sister wrote from Chicago in a hand so tight it looked like it might crack the paper, and told her to come home, where grief could be managed like a polite parlor. She said home was here, where blisters turned into callus, and callus into work done right. Samuel nodded and said land remembers, bad times and good. It waits for hands that know and hearts that stay. They said little more that night. Calling things by their right names had a way of satisfying the mind, so it did not paw the ground for another lap around old worries. When they rose to go inside, Eleanor opened the drawer and took out the small pouch of coins he had given her. She counted enough for seed and nails and a little extra salt. Samuel watched and did not correct her figures. Trust is a kind of math, she thought, and we are getting good at it. By mid-morning, a thin smoke lifted from the north where the Olsons kept their place. For a breath, Eleanor felt her heart strike hard in her chest. She and Samuel stepped into the yard and watched until the wind swung the smoke east and thinned it. A breakfast fire gone wild in a stove would have grown fast and black. This was cook smoke breathing steady. She let the tightness leave her shoulders. Samuel's gaze stayed on the horizon. Men of sense, and men without it, move at the same speed when pride is in the saddle," he said. Then he went back to setting a brace post by the corner of the corral. That afternoon, Nathan Carter rode by and lifted a hand. He did not dismount. He called up the hill that Mercer had been in town buying whiskey for other men and words for himself. He said, "Be watchful." Eleanor thanked him and asked after his mother. He said she was fine, and then flushed like a boy who had not planned to speak so much. The light softened toward evening. Eleanor ladled stew and cut a heel of bread. Samuel brought in kindling and stacked it neat near the stove. They ate in the hush that follows a day of honest labor. Before sleep, she stood at the window one more time and watched the yard. Straight fence. A door that closed true. A revolver oiled and ready in a drawer that used to hold letters from a different life. A man sitting on the porch rail with calm in his posture and a steady attention turned outward. They lingered at the table long after the stew bowl had gone cold, the lamplight turning the room the color of warm honey. Eleanor waited, sensing words gathering in Samuel that would not be rushed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the steady weight of someone naming things that could not be unnamed once set loose. "My mother taught me plants that heal and how to read the high sky for storms," he said, eyes on the wavering flame. She laughed often. The room held that memory for a breath. An echo that softened his face. Then the echo broke. Soldiers came. They said we must go to agency land. Leave the graves. Leave the places where we speak to our dead. My father tried to talk peace. He knew we could not fight so many. Young men were angry. They wanted war. His hands closed on themselves, knuckles pale against the dark of his skin. One night a wagon train was struck. Not our band, but soldiers did not ask which was which. They came at dawn. He stopped as if he had walked into a wall too high to climb. Eleanor reached across the table and touched his hand. He turned his palm up, and their fingers laced as if they had always known how to fit that way. Eleanor drew a slow breath that hurt to hold. "I am so sorry," she said, the words small and honest. "I tracked the soldiers 3 days. He went on, voice rough. "I wanted blood. But when I found them, there were children with them and women going to the new fort. If I killed, I would become what they said I was. So I turned away." He pressed his free hand to his chest. The emptiness stayed, like something cut out that never grows back. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of the names he had said and the ones he had not. Outside, the wind moved softly through the cottonwood, a sound like someone speaking comfort in a language both of them understood without learning. Eleanor felt her throat tighten again. She had cried enough in the last 3 years to salt a field, yet these tears came different, made of recognition instead of helplessness. "Jacob died of fever," she said softly. 3 years ago this winter, just 3 days sick. I tried everything I knew. Tin cup remedies, boiled willow bark. Prayers said in a voice that did not sound like mine. He died holding my hand and telling me to be strong. She looked down at the scarred tabletop and traced a notch Jacob had left with a misplaced hammer swing in their first week in the house. After the funeral, everyone said sell the place and go back east. My sister wrote letters with edges sharp enough to cut. But this land was our dream. Horses and maybe cattle. Something that would last longer than the two of us. When he died, the dream died with him. Or I thought it did. I stayed because walking away felt worse than grief. Pride and an empty ledger. That was what I had left. Then Charles Mercer started circling like a buzzard with a bank book. "Why did you do it?" Samuel asked. "Buy the paper to my freedom and the trouble that came with it." "No," Samuel said. not allowed to be mistaken on this point. It is human. All of us carry wounds. Sometimes healing one makes space for another to knit. The first stars had shown themselves outside the window. Eleanor became aware that they were still holding hands across the table. She did not want to let go. Neither did he. "I dream of them," Samuel said, almost to himself. "My family. Good dreams sometimes. My mother singing. My father teaching me to follow deer without breaking a blade of grass. Other nights the fire comes back, and I wake with their names burning in my mouth." "I dream of Jacob," Eleanor said. "He is always just beyond reach. I go to touch him, and he fades like breath on glass. For a moment I forget in the morning. Then it all returns, and the house feels twice as empty for the remembering." They rose and went to the porch steps, shoulders touching at the place where comfort and boldness meet. Crickets worked the edges of the yard. An owl called from the far cottonwoods. The horses shifted and snorted in the barn as if answering the owl in their own language. "I did not think I would feel anything again," Eleanor said. "After Jacob died, I moved through days like a ghost that did not know it was dead. I kept accounts. I fed the hens. I patched a roof badly and made it worse. But I was only passing time. And now?" Samuel asked, voice low. Samuel lifted their joined hands and touched his lips to her knuckles. "You saved me," he said. "Not just from the shackles, from becoming emptiness in the shape of a man. You gave me purpose that feels like standing on solid ground." "We saved each other," Eleanor whispered. They sat while the night deepened, each lost in a set of thoughts that ran side by side, like two tracks headed toward the same horizon. When Samuel spoke again, he told her of learning to ride before his legs were long enough to reach past a pony's belly. He told her about the night he received the name he carried now, the firelight bright on faces that were gone, but not lost. He spoke of the girl he had hoped to marry before sickness took her in a winter that did not spare much. She laughed easily, he said, and the sound in his memory made her reel for Eleanor in a way grief sometimes fails to do. "Yes," he said, "but also this." He tipped his chin toward the house, the fields, her. From ash, new growth. Not the same forest, but still a living one. They went inside when the air turned sharp. Eleanor made tea and they sat by the coals, talking the way only people talk who have decided against hiding. She told him how Jacob had charmed her at a church supper with a joke that made no sense, but landed anyway 'cause his smile did the work. She told him their wedding day came in a hard rain, and the preacher had to shout the vows to be heard over the drum of water on the roof of the little clapboard church. She told him about their first night in the half-built house when wind found every gap and played all of them like a poor man's organ. Samuel shared more of his people's ways. He spoke of a single maker called by many names. He showed with his hands how ceremony can tilt a heart toward gratitude the way a wedge can start a stubborn log. He said that when a man thanks the river and the deer and the fire, he is not worshiping the thing, but the generosity behind it. Eleanor said Reverend Whitcomb would call that blasphemy. Samuel answered that the Reverend kept company with a God too small to hold everyone. Eleanor laughed, a quiet sound in the low room, and said she suspected as much every time the Reverend counted souls like cattle. "Among my people," Samuel said, "sharing pain and memory like this is a sacred thing. When two speak such truth, they are bound, not by a paper stamped in a courthouse, but by something stronger." Her heart thudded once, hard enough to startle her. "What are you saying?" she asked, though she knew what he meant and knew too that he would not push. "I say I am grateful," he said simply, for your trust, for your truth, for you. Good night, Eleanor, he answered, voice rough with feeling kept in check by respect. In her room, she undressed with hands that trembled in a different way than they had that morning on the porch. She could still feel the warmth of his skin against her mouth, the steadiness of his fingers around hers, the cadence of his voice when he spoke of losses, and the thin gold thread of hope he had not tugged on until tonight. Through the window, she saw his silhouette take its place on the porch, the quiet sentinel who had become as much a part of the house as the lintel he set straight that afternoon. Tomorrow would bring what it always brings. Charles Mercer would keep his accounts and his grudges. The Harlan brothers would look for an excuse to spend a cartridge. Reverend Whitcomb would practice sermons the Lord had not asked him to preach. Yet tonight 2 people had laid down the worst of their stories on the table between them and found that the table held. They had taken grief from separate rooms and woven it into a single strong rope that could pull a life forward. In Red Rock, the last of the saloon lamps would be going down. Sheriff Callahan would be making one more walk past the jailhouse before turning in. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote would steal a hen from a careless coop and pay for it tomorrow. Life did not pause for sorrow or love. It made room for both. If you were stubborn enough to claim the space, just before sleep took her. Eleanor felt the weight of the arrowhead Samuel had left on the table beside her bed. A small white stone shaped by a skilled hand. She had not asked the meaning yet. She would. For now it was enough to know that a thing so carefully kept had been set within reach of her hand. She closed her eyes on a house that no longer sounded hollow, and a future that no longer looked like a ledger of debts. Morning would bring fence lines to walk and a town to outlast. Morning would also bring coffee on the porch and a lesson or two in words that fit the mouth like stones warmed by sun. Out under the cottonwood, the night held steady. Wind moved gently through leaves that had listened to more than they could say. The horses breathed slow and even. A man sat watch with calm on his face. And in a small room where a lamp had gone dark, a woman slept without flinching at every creak. Between them lay a truth spoken plain, and a promise that did not need ink. In the small room off the barn, Samuel opened a worn leather pouch he had hidden for years, and let the smooth white arrowhead rest in his palm. His mother had chipped it from stone beside a cold spring, shaping it with careful patience. He remembered her hands steady in the firelight, the small smile she wore when a tool or charm came together just right. The arrowhead held the scent of smoke and sage in his memory. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would place it in Eleanor's hands. Among his people, a gift like that was more than thanks. It spoke of protection and belonging, of a bond that did not need a priest or paper to prove it. The next day brought a sky as clear as polished glass. Eleanor and Samuel were at the chicken coop with a coil of wire and a pail of nails when they noticed the black pillar of smoke lifting from the east. They looked at each other once, and then both ran. The Garrett place lay over the rise and a creek bed. They did not speak as they ran. Breath and pounding feet were enough. When they topped the hill, the Garrett barn was a sheet of flame. Heat rolled across the yard in waves. People were already there, some throwing water from the well, some trying to keep sparks off the small house and the cottonwood that shaded it. Martha Garrett's voice cut through the roar. The children. Emma is still inside. She was playing in the loft. You cannot go in there. Paul, the roof is going. My little girl is in there. Paul shouted. Samuel did not hesitate. He handed Eleanor the nail pail and ran straight for the open doors where smoke boiled out. Someone yelled for him to stop. Another voice muttered something ugly that Eleanor did not bother to identify. She never took her eyes off the door. The seconds stretched until they felt like a punishment. "She is breathing," Samuel said, voice rough, scared, but not badly hurt. Dr. Carter pushed in beside Martha and looked the girl over with quick hands. Nathan stood near, pale and wide-eyed, and for a heartbeat he looked like a boy again, rather than the tall young man who stocked shelves at the mercantile. Paul Garrett stood a few steps off, his expression stunned, as if the world had shifted under his boots. He had been among those calling for Samuel to be driven out not long ago. Now he swallowed hard and tried to speak. Samuel gave one short nod and turned to what still needed doing. "Animals?" he asked. "Did you get them clear?" "Chickens, maybe," Nathan said, finding his voice. "We do not know if any were trapped." By then more neighbors had arrived, some with buckets, some with blankets to swat at embers. A line formed from the well to the barn, a human chain moving water hand to hand. Samuel slid into the line without waiting to be asked. After a moment, the people around him made space, and then no one seemed to notice the shift. Eleanor took a place as well, passing buckets until her shoulders burned and her palms stung. The barn would not be saved. That truth came early, but the house could be kept from catching, and the cottonwood could be spared. And sometimes that is what victory looks like. "Brave thing you did," he said at last. A child needed help. Samuel answered, "Not many would run into a fire like that." Sheriff Callahan said, and left the rest unsaid. "Mr. Tallbear," she said, "careful with the name. What you did today was heroic." He inclined his head and did not make a speech. Emma, now calmer in her mother's arms, wriggled down and ran straight to Samuel. The soot on his cheek made a clean smear where she pecked him with a quick child's kiss. "The nice man saved me," she told her mother with absolute certainty. "He came through the smoke like an angel." "You saved my child," she said. "I do not care what anyone says or what names they have used. You are welcome at our table any time." She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, leaving a light patch in the soot. A few women gasped, but they were fewer than Eleanor would have guessed a week ago. "Martha, Mrs." Alden began. "Do not Martha me. Prudence." Martha snapped without looking. This man ran into a burning building while some stood around weighing words. If that is what you call savage, maybe we need more of that and less of what passes for polite. "No debt," Samuel said. "Neighbors help neighbors." "Yes," Paul said, voice thick. "Neighbors." People started to drift away then, but the air had changed. Stares that would have been hard yesterday were thoughtful now. A few men nodded. A few women smiled a little and did not seem to hate themselves for it. Reverend Whitcomb arrived late, face set for a sermon. He tried to gather the moment back into his hands. "Oh, hush." Ingrid Olsen cut in. Arrived with Lars and still in her apron. "The only devil I see is in hearts turned mean. This man saved a child. What more evidence do you require?" A murmur of agreement moved in a small wave. Reverend Whitcomb found himself speaking to fewer backs than he liked and let the rest of his sermon blow away in the evening wind. As Eleanor and Samuel turned toward home, Nathan Carter hurried up, hat in hand, nervous and sincere. "Mrs. Graves." "Mr. Tallbear, can I say a word? I have been thinking about what you said in town." "Mrs. Graves," he said to Eleanor, "about seeing a man worth saving. I see it now, and I am ashamed it took something like this for my eyes to open." He turned to Samuel. "I would like to learn from you if you would allow it. About horses, about tracking, about looking at the land the way you do." Samuel studied him for a long moment. as if he could feel the shape of the request and the shape of the boy asking. "Come to the ranch," he said. "We will talk." They walked home in a quiet that did not need words. By the time they reached the yard, Eleanor noticed the way Samuel held his left arm close, careful without making a show of it. "Small burn," he admitted. "Nothing serious." Inside, she set a kettle on and brought out her salve, a jar she nursed along each year with beeswax and oil, and the last of the calendula she could coax from the garden. Samuel sat at the kitchen table while she cleaned the singed skin along his forearm and the side of his hand. The burns were not deep, but they made her breath catch anyway. He watched her with steady eyes while she worked. "You could have died in there," she said softly, binding clean cloth in place. The words came out before she could school them. "That is different." "No," he answered. Same heart. She could not argue with that. So she did not. When she finished, she put the jar away and poured coffee for both of them, strong and plain. For a while they sat with their cups between their palms, letting their hands warm and their thoughts settle. "Some hearts turn easy," Samuel said. "Some never turn. A little girl is alive. That is the measure that matters." She nodded. He was right. He usually was when he used so few words. She reached into the cupboard and took down a square of folded oilcloth. Inside lay the colt that had belonged to Jacob. She had given it to Samuel that morning, and he had accepted it with a gravity that told her he understood not just the danger, but the trust. "I meant what I said when I put this in your hand," she told him again. "I trust you with my life." He looked up, surprised by the repetition, then smiled a little. "I will not dishonor the gift." "I have something for you," he said, and reached into his pocket. He unwrapped the leather pouch and placed the white arrowhead in her palm. "My mother made this. It is a protection. Also a promise. Words do not fit it well in English." The stone was cool against her skin, then warmed as she held it. She saw in his face what the gift meant and felt her chest lift with something like awe. "Thank you," she said. "I will keep it near." He closed her fingers gently around it. "It belongs near your heart," he said. They ate simple food with the companionable silence of people who had earned it. When they had finished, Samuel rinsed the plates without being asked and set them to dry. Outside, the last of the smoke from the Garrett place faded into the sky. Somewhere a coyote barked. The sound did not feel like a threat. It felt like the land reminding them it was still there and still wider than the day's trouble. Before he went out to check the horses and make his last walk around the yard, Samuel paused by the table. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. The words plain and without ornament. She met his eyes. "Thank you for running into a fire," she said. "Thank you for coming back out." She lay down and listened for the soft click of the latch when Samuel came in from his last rounds. When it came, the small sound felt like a bell rung for safety. She slept the sleep of someone who had faced a bad thing and done the next right task anyway. In the morning, they would hitch the wagon and drive to help the Garretts sort what could be salvaged from the ash and frame a plan for what should be raised in its place. Eleanor knew how these valleys worked. Bad fortune fell, then neighbors lifted. She also knew that lifting would go better now that the man everyone had been trained to fear had carried a child out of fire while others weighed their words. She reached to touch the arrowhead once before closing her eyes. The stone held a quiet strength. It felt like a small oath she was more than willing to keep. Eleanor and Samuel reached the porch while the sky still held a band of pale gold over the mesas. She guided him to the kitchen table and set out a basin, clean cloth, and her small jar of salve. The burns across his forearm were angry, but not deep. She washed away the soot with steady hands, dabbing and rapping with the careful economy of someone who has tended hard things before. Samuel watched her in quiet focus, the set of his shoulders easing as the cool water did its work. When she finished, he flexed his fingers and tested the bandage, then looked up to meet her eyes. "Maybe a few," he answered. "Some hearts turn with the wind. Some stay like stone. The child breathes. That is the day's measure." She could not help the breath that left her then, half relief and half something she did not dare name. The fear of the barn doors swallowing him had left a hollow ache she was only now admitting. She poured coffee, and they took it out to the steps. Across the valley, lanterns moved like slow fireflies as neighbors searched ash piles and stacked what lumber could be saved. Plans for a new frame would rise with the sun. This country broke things, and then people gathered to build again. That was its rhythm. "They will raise a new barn," Eleanor said. "Folks turn out when disaster strikes. It is one thing the valley still does right." "They will," Eleanor answered. "Paul Garrett is proud, but he is fair." As if the evening wanted to prove her right, a single rider came up the lane at an easy trot. Paul Garrett swung down in the yard, tired to the bone and black with smoke, but his voice had its steadiness back. "Mrs. Graves, Mr. Tallbear, I have come to ask a favor. We mean to raise a new barn on Saturday. I would be obliged if you both would join us. And, sir, I would be grateful for your eye on the big timbers. Nathan Carter says you set things true out here." Paul's mouth tipped into a real smile for the first time since the fire. "Thank you. Spread the word where you can. We will need every hand." When he rode off, the air felt lighter. Autumn crept in around them as the heat bled out of the ground. Eleanor shivered without thinking. Samuel shrugged out of his coat and set it across her shoulders. A simple kindness that warmed more than the night air. "Today moved a stone," he said, "but some men will try to roll it back. Mercer will not like the way people looked at me. We keep our eyes open." "I know," she said, "but we also take the grace we are given." Today showed that hearts can bend. They sat until the stars burned bright over Red Rock. Somewhere a coyote called, and the answer rose over the ridge. What once sounded like loneliness now had the shape of home. The word that had hung between them earlier returned and settled in the quiet. Love. Neither of them tried to push it away. Saturday arrived with the kind of blue sky that makes a person believe in second chances. Wagons rolled into the Garrett yard before the sun cleared the cottonwoods. Men stacked milled boards, sorted pegs, and laid out the sills. Women spread blankets under the trees and unpacked baskets until the long tables looked like a harvest. Children ran in looping paths and were sent to carry water with solemn importance. Eleanor drove in with Samuel while the light was still low and soft. Their wagon held a box of tools, a coil of rope, and 3 pies that had kept her up late, for a breath or two after they stopped. A hush passed through the nearer group as folks took measure of old habits and new facts. Then nods came, a few friendly waves. Paul Garrett strode over and offered his hand to Samuel in a way that was meant to be seen. The work formed itself without fuss. Samuel found his place where weight and judgment met. He measured the mortises with his eye before he ever touched a chisel. He showed how to crib the first post so no one lost fingers when the frame rose. Men who had once crossed the street to avoid him now listened as he said, "Steady now, and shift left, and hold your end high." His voice carried quiet authority that fit him like his own shadow. Eleanor joined the women at the tables and yet watched the frame lift notch by notch. She could not help it. What she saw there was more than lumber. It was the slow turning of a community's face. Dr. Carter asked Samuel where he had learned a particular joinery. From lodges that must carry snow and live with heat. Samuel answered, different materials, same truth, build with the wind in mind. Sheriff Callahan stood at the margins, taking it in with the wary interest of a man who has made decisions for a town and knows when to let a different kind of order take the lead. He nodded once at something Samuel said and stepped in to brace a brace at the right moment. Small things, yet they added up. After the meal, they returned to the work, with shoulders loose and spirits high. Nathan Carter stayed close to Samuel, shadowing him as a student shadows a teacher who does not waste words. How high to set the ridge, how to walk a beam without show, how to let weight do its own work once the pulleys take the strain. By late day, the new skeleton claimed its space fully. The sun slid toward the rim and burnished every fresh cut. The men stepped back and admired what their hands had made. Paul Garrett climbed onto a plank and raised his palm for attention. "Friends and neighbors," he said, his voice filling the yard without strain. "Today, we replaced what was burned. We did it together. I need also to say this," he added. "A week ago I stood with men who wanted to run a man out because he was different and because I was afraid of what I did not understand. I was wrong. Samuel Tallbear carried my daughter out of fire. He asked nothing in return. Today he worked like 3 men to help raise my barn. He showed me what a neighbor is." Paul lifted his cup. "So I offer a toast to Samuel Tallbear. He saw a child in danger and did not hesitate. He met contempt with dignity and fear with courage. Welcome to this valley. Friend." Hear, hear rose up from 100 throats. Cups went high. The sound rolled off the hills and seemed to come back bigger. Samuel stood where he was, not one for a center stage. His face went still in a way that meant he was feeling more than he would show. Eleanor's hand found his, and he squeezed once, as if to anchor himself. Samuel did not step onto a plank. He simply turned so his voice would carry, "Thank you," he said. "Where I come from, a raising is a sacred act. It is not just building a roof. It is building shelter for life and work. Today we built more than a barn. We built understanding." He let the words settle. "I know some still doubt. That is natural. I am here to work, to help, to be a good neighbor. My hand is open to any who will take it. We share the same sun, the same rain, the same hope for a good harvest, the same care for our children. Those things make us the same, more than skin makes us different." Silence held for a moment like a small held breath. Then old Lars Olsen began to clap, sharp and proud. Others joined. The sound spread until even men who were not sure where they stood found their palms meeting. At the edge of the crowd, the Harlan brothers leaned together and muttered. Their faces were a tangle of dislikes and half-born fears. Change rarely chose the easiest students. "We will consider it," Eleanor said, meaning it. Bridges did not build themselves in a day, but the first planks were there. Beyond the oak, Charles Mercer sat his horse, hat pulled low. He had not lifted a hand or a beam and had no pie on his plate. He watched, a black dot at the edge of welcome. Samuel followed Eleanor's glance and gave the smallest nod. Trouble, not now, but soon enough. Just then Emma Garrett dashed up with a cloth bundle in both hands. "Mr. Samuel," she announced with the solemn excitement only a child can muster. "I made you something." She held out a small stitch figure with button eyes and crooked wings. "A guardian angel," she said, "to keep you safe, like you kept me safe." They loaded the wagon at dusk, tools stacked and ropes coiled, pies long gone from the table. The drive home was quiet in the easy way of people who have spent themselves well. Halfway to Red Rock, Eleanor let her shoulder rest against Samuel's arm. "Today was better than I dared hope," she said. "You gave me the chance," he answered. "You saw a man and not a rumor." The rest followed the work. "You earned it with courage and steady hands," she said. "We earned it together," he replied. "Partners." Samuel was quiet for a few beats. "He must have been a good man," he said at last, "to win your heart. I honor what he meant to you." "I know you do," she said. He helped her down from the wagon when they reached the yard, his hands lingering at her waist a heartbeat longer than necessity required. In the lamplight, they looked at one another. The day had spoken for them, but some things still wanted saying. Not yet, she thought, and saw the same decision move across his face. Tonight is for the work finished and the work to come. Tomorrow will bring whatever it brings. Later. As the ranch settled into its night sounds, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, out on the porch. Samuel sat with his coat around his shoulders, watchful without tension, as if he and the dark had come to terms. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods a coyote called again, and this time the answer sounded less like wildness and more like a vow. The valley had not turned wholly, but it had turned a little. Sometimes a little is enough to start a life over. This story is more than a tale of the frontier. It is a mirror for our own lives. At its heart lies the reminder that dignity is not given by society. It is something every human carries, waiting for someone to recognize it. Clara chose to see Samuel not as others labeled him, but as he truly was, a man capable of honor, work, love, and hope. That choice opened a door to healing not only for him, but for her too. For those of us in our later years, this message strikes deep. We know how quickly time passes, how easily people are judged, cast aside, or misunderstood. Yet we also know the power of a kind word, a hand extended, a moment of seeing someone clearly. These are the choices that outlast wealth or status. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life, stories of courage, dignity, and hope. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the good that still lives in all of us.